On May 24th, the Sono Luminous record label released a fabulous CD that features the three-time Grammy-nominated chamber choir Skylark, led by conductor Mathew Guard. Described as the cream of the American crop of choral singing, Skylark is a premier ensemble made up of leading American vocal soloists, chamber musicians, and music educators. Known for their innovative programming and first rate performances, the ensemble has established themselves as one of the preeminent choral ensembles in the world. Called Clear Voices in the Dark, Skylark's latest CD features a true choral tour de force, written by Francis Poulenc. His work, Figure Humaine, written in 1943 during the German occupation of France during the Second World War. The CD also features some gorgeous settings of folk songs from the American Civil War. Next year will be the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War and the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. This CD is a fantastic choral exploration of the thoughts, feelings, and emotions experienced during a time of darkness. It offers some gorgeously clear choral selections that were written against the bleak backdrop of war. And joining me here over Zoom to talk about the CD, Clear Voices in the Dark, I am joined by Skylark conductor Mathew Guard. Hi, Mathew. Nice to have you here.
Hi, thanks so much for having me, Chris. Looking forward to chatting.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Before we get to the CD, can we take a moment and just can you talk about the founding of Skylark? Skylark, I was reading it was founded in around 2011. How did the singers come together, and have you always been its music director?
Yes, so you're right. 2011 was the first experiment that we did, and it is a group that I began, and it really was an experiment at the time in whether I could return to the world of music. I had done a lot of music in my college years and before, and then I got in a different direction after that. Kind of worked in the business world for about 8 or 9 years, and
Mm,
I was really missing being in the creative world. And I took a leave of absence from my job and got some really fantastic singers together who I knew for a long weekend. And we rehearsed and performed a program. And that was the first uh, Skylark embodiment. And my thought at the time was to actually go back to grad school, perhaps for conducting. But several of my good colleagues who sang that weekend said to me, well, you could do that, or you could just kind of keep doing this. And if people will sing for you, you're going to learn as you go. And that's
mm,
been the journey over the last 12 or 13 years is a lot of trial by fire and learning on the job myself, and then finding a group identity and finding people who really found this group to be a wonderful outlet for them and a place that felt like home. And we've had a very similar core group of people involved in the group since about 2013, 2014. There's still are 5 or 6 artists who've been with the group for over a decade. There's 3 of them who are on all of our recordings. And so it's
yeah.
it's been a wonderful journey.
It's fantastic. When I was prepping for the interview, one of the things that became noticeably clear is the importance you place on concert and recording programming. This has sort of been one of the tenets of the Ensemble Skylark. Why is putting together an intensely cohesive program of music so important to you?
Well, I think it goes back to the founding story. I realized maybe 2 or 3 years in that when you get artists of this caliber together, as a director, really your only job is to assemble a program that causes them to be inspired and engaged. Because a lot of times programs are not particularly well thought out, or it's just the old standards being done again. And people who are professional musicians can grow weary and tired of that and just kind of phone it in. It's not that interesting to do one more version of a piece they've done 6 times in the last 2 years.
Mm,
And so my job actually, I certainly run rehearsals and I conduct, but these folks don't always need a conductor, and they can run rehearsals consort style if necessary. So really my job as an artist is to assemble programs that will inspire them and our audiences and hopefully bring a different audience into a choral concert that might not realize how exciting and interesting it might be able to be.
mhm, mhm. So on Skylark's latest disc, Clear Voices in the Dark, you've paired up Poulenc's Figure Humaine with American Civil War era songs and hymns. Can you talk about how this program came together? And also, why did you decide to alternate sections of Figure Humaine with Civil War songs? It's not like we're getting the entire Poulenc piece together. It alternates back and forth. Why did you decide to do that?
Oh, good questions. The real impetus was this piece, Figure of Men, I wanted to tackle because it's one of the kind of Mount Everests of
Mm-hmm.
unaccompanied choral music. It's for double choir in 6 parts, so there's 12 independent vocal lines. It was written in 1943 in occupied France, and I think the difficulty was intentional. I think Poulenc wondered if it would ever be performed and wanted to make it a true gauntlet to actually get through it, and it is. And because of that, it's not performed very often because it's very difficult to mount a performance. It takes a lot of rehearsal time to get this piece kind of into your brain and into your voice. It's only about 20 minutes long when it's all said and done, the Figure of Men. And that creates creating a concert program really difficult because you want to have a concert program be at least an hour if it's with breaks to perform. And 20 minutes of music is not very much. And especially if it's the most difficult music that you're going to sing ever. So the question is, how do you create a program that allows you to give the due time to prepare this piece, which is just a monument, but also fills the time with other stuff?
Right.
Um, there's also another challenge, which as a listener, the Poulenc is pretty gnarly. Now, and purists who are real classical music nerds like myself can get through it and really get a lot out of 20 minutes of Poulenc in a row. But for an average audience member who's coming to a choral concert, it's a lot to ask of them to sit through 20 minutes of that in a row.
Mm,
You lose some people because of the complexity of it. And also as a singer, it's 20 minutes that's very, very difficult vocal and brain work. And so the thought was, is there a way to make the Poulenc more accessible, more universal, and more approachable by putting it in a context where there's some simpler music going on throughout. And also because the music from the Civil War is simpler and easier to sing, the rehearsal time can be spent 85, 90% on the difficult music. And the Civil War songs kind of jump off the page to an American choir because they're just American folk hymns to a large extent. Um,
mm,
so I understand breaking it up could be controversial. Some people might not like that. I was very intentional about how we do it. The Poulenc has a very specific harmonic progression. It's very clear that the keys are very meaningful in the mind of the composer, and so every Civil War song that we've interspersed stays within the same harmonic
mm,
environment as the previous movement, so we don't break that flow. And we also have paired the Civil War songs thematically. So the poetry of the American piece reflects similar ideas that are in the preceding movements, Éluard poetry from France. So you have that harmonic and also poetic connection, which I think allows the fact that the idiom changes so much to make a bit more sense.
yeah, absolute genius. That's wonderful. I was reading the booklet, and my understanding is you went through a fair amount of effort finding these Civil War songs, and then you yourself arranged some of them. Can you talk about your arrangements? What are some of the kinds of things that you did with them? And what was sort of your thinking when you did the arrangements?
Good question. Yeah, there's not when I started off this process, there's 8 Poulenc movements, so I needed at least 8 Civil War songs, I thought, for this to work. And there's not that many really good arrangements for top level choir of Civil War songs. There are a few, and we have 3 of them on the disc. There's a great Alice Parker arrangement that she did for the Robert Shaw Chorale. There are some arrangements by Ron Jeffers, who's a great composer in the northwest of the U.S. But there's not a lot out there for a cappella choir. And then once
Mm,
you combine what I described before, the need to try to pair things harmonically and thematically, that's almost impossible. It's like needle in a haystack.
mm,
So I had to find some things that would work. And a lot of those required arranging. The arrangements are not complicated. I was not trying to over-engineer the pieces. I wanted to allow them to be simple and beautiful because simple and beautiful is good enough a lot of the times if it's really done really well. And we already had complex and really impenetrable with the Poulenc to a lot of people. So it's a dialectic to go back and forth. The couple of them, this song called "Break It Gently to My Mother," which is
mm,
a really devastating poetic piece about a son on a battlefield who's just had a mortal wound. I found that actually in some old historic sheet music in the Duke University online archive. And it's like there's a piano music from 1860 something, and there's a very simple melody line with an accompaniment, and then there's a four-part a cappella chorus. And so all we did for that was just choose the verses, create like a bagpipe drone almost from the choir for the soloist to sing over the top of it, and then we sang the four-part chorus. So it wasn't much of an arrangement at all. It was more of putting it in the right key in the right context. A few others I did a bit more, but just nothing that's attempting to draw attention to itself.
Yeah. Well, they come off beautifully on the disc. I want to turn to Figure You Men. It is such a virtuosic choral work. I mean, there's these wonderful crunchy and dissonant moments. You touched on it earlier. It's written for 12 voices, but the 12 voices are divided up into two choirs. Can you talk about how those two choirs are used? How Poulenc makes use of them?
Absolutely. It's definitely, I think it's related to the surrealist poetry of Paul Éluard, who all the libretto is from that poet. And that French surrealist poetry is pretty wild. And it oftentimes feels like it's two sides of someone's brain, or it's flitting between different personalities or takes on the world, sometimes very serious, sometimes very frivolous. So the idea of having different voices, kind of going back and forth, I think makes a lot of sense. And I don't think there's necessarily a unified theme between one choir having a certain role or the other, like the angel and the devil on your shoulder. But there is a bit of that in terms of, I think that the first choir is a bit more hopeful, a bit brighter. Second choir sometimes is the one bringing the bad news, is slower. Um, and it definitely creates this dialogue, because the poetry is almost like line by line is a different vignette or an idea. One of our colleagues has talked about it's almost like you shake a snow globe every phrase, and that everything totally changes, the harmony changes, and going back and forth between the choirs allows that to happen. There's lots of fairly sudden changes in harmonic environment or dynamic, or feel that double choir texture allows.
Mhm. Did Paul Éluard, did he write all the poetry during the Second World War? Uh,
That's a that's a good question. I'm not sure that I can tell you the answer to that 100%. There's definitely some pieces that were incredibly impactful because they were written then. So Liberté, for example, the last movement, is basically a list of everything in life that would be meaningful without having freedom. And that was actually dropped via airlift into France by Allied forces as basically resistance propaganda, to
hmm.
get stirred up. Good question, and I don't think I can answer with certainty, and I want to put my foot in my mouth on the other
Yeah,
seven.
yeah. One of the yeah, I mean, one of the things that really struck me, I mean, I'm listening to the music and I'm reading the text and I'm putting it in my mind against the backdrop of the Second World War. Yeah, there really is this duality, sort of this optimistic quality to the piece, and then there's sort of the other side of it, the grim reality, right?
Absolutely. And there are really strong harmonic relationships. I don't want to go too deep on the nerd the nerd rabbit hole right now, but there are definitely keys. So the key of E major is the key of freedom and redemption, and then the final chord is an E major. And the piece starts off in B minor. So it has this kind of fifth away and minor and not a dominant relationship. There are certain E flat minor is the key of that's just totally dark and grim. So E flat minor versus E major feels very different. And in the final movement, and this liberté, where there's basically a list of everything in the world that would be meaningless without freedom, it goes literally into every single key, major and minor, except for E flat minor, and ends in E major. And so there's really some wonderful symbolic relationships that have to do with the emotions in the piece as well.
Yeah. I was reading that and I was thinking it's amazing. E flat minor represents the occupation. Yeah. And then liberté
Yeah.
is freedom. Yeah.
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 The third movement starts off with this really slow and sad E flat minor, that's basically talking about a corpse lying in the earth. And that is the most just calm and spare and grim moment Um,
Mm. The CD, Clear Voices in the Dark, it's a knockout. For you as a conductor and a programmer, what do you hope people are going to take away from the experience of listening to the disc?
I think the most powerful piece of it to me is the fact that so much beauty can emerge from times of struggle and darkness. Um, and you have two time periods of war 80 years apart, and you have music emerging from them that is human souls trying to make sense of dark times and effectively doing so through music and through art. And I think that universality and the ability for art to emerge from those times is really deeply inspiring. And it can also place you in the context. It can take you there in a way that you don't realize how atmospheric it can be. And this is also, well, these are not distant times. I mean, there are people alive now who were alive during the Second World War who can speak to that directly. Civil War in the United States is further away, but we performed this program in live concert over the course of the last 8 or 9 years in several different tour environments. And at one point, we were in Washington, D.C. performing this concert, and a gentleman came up to me afterwards and said that one of these Civil War songs that he heard, he started to cry immediately when he heard it because his grandfather had sung that song to him when he was a little boy because his father was in the Civil War and had sung that to him. So there was this direct musical connection that still exists. And I think that's also a really powerful piece of this music.
Absolutely. Matthew, this has just been a real thrill to talk to you today about Clear Voices in the Dark as performed by Skylark. It really is a phenomenal disc. Hopefully, it gets you a fourth Grammy nomination, and even better, a win. Thanks for taking the time.
We won't talk about that, but I appreciate your kind words.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been great.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.